their life in Palm Springs since they arrived in this area in 1934. But first, I would love to have Bess describe the home that we're in, which is the setting for this interview, the Matloff's home. Please, Bess, tell us about it.
Okay, Carol. Let's see, 1946, we came here to this house. We purchased it, and it was the last house on the last block in Palm Springs on Indian Avenue. And at that time, it was very convenient for the two children we had to have transportation right on Indian Avenue. But you mentioned about air conditioning?
Right, I was wondering what it was like, because certainly, did you have air conditioning in those days when you moved in?
No, we did. We had a swamp cooler. And after we used that for a while, the air conditioning came in, and due to the construction of the house, we had to use window air conditioning. And life became much easier and a lot better after we got the electric air conditioning.
You know, before we go on, am I right in saying that this is very, this lovely home is very adobe in feeling with the brick?
Yes.
And it must have many of the same principles that the people used in those days to insulate a home.
Yeah, the older houses were built. When we came here, the house was already built. They used the brick walls and hollow tile walls and what kind of roof is this, Irv? It had the red tile.
Red tile?
Red tile.
Uh-huh, right.
That's what they used in those years to try and keep the elements of the heat out and the cold.
Would you say it was Spanish?
Spanish.
Being the photographer and artist you are, I absolutely believe you, Irv. I'd like to get for a moment to 1934, and that, if I'm not mistaken, is the year that you arrived in the desert.
True.
All right. Can you tell us what happened when you arrived, Irv, where you first went?
I wound up in Snow Creek.
How'd you get here, and what kind of vehicle?
Well, I had a Chevrolet touring car that was hooked up to a homemade trailer.
How did that get homemade? How did you envision all this?
Well, when I got the idea of coming down here, I had to have some kind of a plan of where I was going to live. And I designed a trailer that looked like a ship.
Yeah.
That's all right. Take your time. Bess, did Irv meet someone that helped build that ship construction?
Yes, he had a friend that helped build the trailer. They put it together, and it took a long time. How long did it take to build that?
Gosh, it's so many years ago that I can't remember.
I would say it took the biggest part of a year, didn't it?
Well, I think it's important that we point out for the youngsters that are going to view this tape that in those days, of course, they didn't have traveling vans and motor vehicle and recreation vehicles as we know that people can pile into today.
It was a long time before that when they got this idea of the trailer, and they hauled it down with a hitch on his car.
Bess, did you come with Irv at that point in time in 1934?
Yes, his mother, his brother, and myself brought him down. And we got to Snow Creek and unhitched. I went back home. He stayed alone at Snow Creek.
What did you think about life in Snow Creek when you were there alone?
Well, it was just like fantasy land.
In what way?
Everything was clear. The atmosphere was clear. And being November, it was very brisk. Had no facilities as far as a toilet is concerned. So we parked where there was quite a bit of foliage, like bushes.
I understand. I've been a camper, even though I don't look it. I understand.
Well, that didn't take too long after things were built up a little bit. Or you had more conveniences as time went on.
Were there cows around there?
Yes, there were. It was a feeding.
Ground for the cows?
Right.
Did you enjoy that kind of a neighbor?
Well, I didn't have time
That's interesting.
to enjoy, or I was so flabbergasted the fact that I was in a place where I was happy with, and maybe about 200 or 300 yards away from me was a couple. I was 30 years old at that particular time, and this couple, I went over and introduced myself. They had a tent, and he was an assistant director for a Western picture.
Well, at that
Did
time,
they make movies out here
yes,
in those days?
yes. They were out there on a shoot. But
Right.
after a short time, you were very lonely in Snow Creek and decided to come to Palm Springs.
But before you moved into Palm Springs, did you have a relationship with a Mr. C.C. Kavanaugh, that name I love?
I sure did.
Would you tell me a little bit about him?
Well, he was the means of getting the mail into Palm Springs and out of Palm Springs. He would pick up the sacks of mail and drive it up to, which was a short distance from Snow Creek, but that's where the train stopped. We had a Palm Springs station stop there for the Southern Pacific, and he would pick up the mail, bring it down here, and he had this lot.
In Las Palmas Estates. That's yes.
He had a piece of land,
Yes.
but the one, before we get to that, I love what Irv told me when we were chatting about this before, that there was a pipe in the ground.
Oh yes.
And tell us a little bit, if you can, about that. I love that.
In one of my little walks that I did around to familiarize myself with the ground around there, there was a path that
That had the pipe.
Bess,
Yes.
you could help with
Yes.
this a little bit.
Well, I remember when you had that. That's the pipe you used to listen to, and you could hear him coming in. Timing.
Am I right in saying then the sound would come up through the pipe like amplification?
right.
And that would indicate Mr. C.C. Kavanaugh was on his way with the mail,
No,
or
he was on his way home.
his way home.
He lived there,
Huh.
and another job that he had was he'd keep the intake, the water intake
Oh,
for the water that came into Palm Springs. So that
he judged that water intake? Took care of that water
he,
intake?
he was the caretaker.
Huh. The forerunner to the Desert Water Agency.
That's what it was.
And now we have all these people making decisions, and in those days, Mr. C.C. Kavanaugh
Yeah.
He
had
ca-
a lot of responsibility.
Well, I used to go up to his cabin quite often, and his cabin was right next to this.
Well, it was the water where the water flowed from up in the mountains. That's the top of Snow Creek.
Right, top of, to this day, if I'm not mistaken, we're still getting a tremendous
Yes.
amount of water coming from that same area as the snows melt.
That's
Is that
right.
not correct?
Mhm.
See, he was actually working for the Southern Pacific Railroad.
Let me ask you this, Irv. How did you get land and move from Snow Creek into Palm Springs?
In a very short time that I stayed in Snow Creek, I got kind of disoriented. in fact, quite a bit distressed. I never had a life where I was by myself like that.
That's
And
interesting.
I made up my mind that I was going to hook up my trailer to the car, which was a very difficult thing for me at that time. And I was going to wait at the bottom of the road where Carl came in to go to his home. And when he saw me there at that point in the road, which now is 10,
Huh.
and I told him my problem. He says, I have a lot in Palm Springs. At that time, that's where the Hermosa condos are.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
And he says, if you hide your trailer in the back of the trees, you can stay there. And he had a place where he had an electric meter and a shower and what he called a submarine.
What was the submarine?
That's a good question. The submarine was a hut that was made a frame. The hut was made out of the framework was made out of wood, which was covered by sheet metal, and the sheet metal was covered with flannel cotton sheets, and he had it fixed where the water dripped on the sheet metal.
Fascinating.
And he had a little fan in one end of the what he called a submarine, and that used to lower the temperature between 30 and 40 degrees.
Well, what you're really describing, and I'm not an expert, is the forerunner
Exactly.
of this cooling system we see sprinkling water on the roof, let's say at Las Casuelas
Exactly.
Terraza
And-
on South Palm
and
Canyon
that-
in these days.
Exactly.
Correct.
Huh.
And he would use that hut to rest between runs for the post office, for the mail.
Well, that's how
course.
we got our mail.
Of course, when he didn't use the hut, I was in there.
Tell me, were you happier or more?
Very, very happy.
Once you came from Snow Creek to this land in Palm Springs.
But Carol, the reason all this came about, Irv was sent here for his health. We're getting into all this story, and we didn't say why. Irv was sent here for his health with a respiratory problem. And that's what started the whole business.
Very good.
Yes, we got to get to why he never was alone in this kind of an atmosphere. But he worked it out beautifully, and after he was here a while, then I joined him we had one child. And then
And that was Victoria?
That's Victoria.
And she was 3 years old, am I correct? When you...
You're exactly right.
Okay,
It was
now we've got you here. And I knew that about Irv's health. I just am so glad that you brought it up because I didn't know just,
Yes,
how
yes.
much you wanted
You
to
did,
Yes.
speak about
you
it.
did very well.
Oh, very
Thanks,
well.
Coach. Tell me, Bess, what was your reaction when you finally realized you were coming here to live, that you couldn't be without this wonderful gentleman?
Yes. I gave well, we got married, and you make a commitment. I thought that was for life. But after I saw this kind of life, I wasn't so sure that was the
I love
commitment. However, I tried and I adjusted. I guess never entirely, but we made the best of a situation. And there were very few people, we didn't get in contact with too many people. It wasn't too many in those years.
Bess, did you see fairly soon after you arrived here that this climate was helping Irv's health?
Oh, tremendously. Oh, yes. That gave us the courage.
I was going to think that must have given you the impetus to live through a lot of other difficulties.
Exactly what it did. It did him a lot of good, and it was an excellent way to bring his health back.
Tell me, did your second child arrive, and where was the
Let's
child
see.
born?
Paul, we got pregnant here.
Good point. Glad to hear the we. I know it's a cooperative effort.
Yes, it took two of us.
She came down to visit, and the visit wound up in the submarine.
I understand.
And it was cooler in there. And then when we had to have a place to be born for the new child, I had to go back to Los Angeles. There wasn't any hospitals here at that time.
Did you have some physicians in town?
Oh, yes.
Would you name some of the names? I know there's such old-timer names that are fun to
we
review.
had Dr. Staley.
Dr. Oliver.
Dr. Oliver. Who else
There
was?
was an old-timer, his name was Reed.
Dr. Reed?
Dr. Reed.
Uh-huh.
There was a doctor that did lung situations in those years. That was wasn't that Dr. Goldberg?
Well, he built the
Riverside General Hospital.
yes.
Oh, I see. No, I didn't. I never knew that. In fact, I'm remiss in not finding out more about that history. Did a lot of people here in those days that needed medical care go either to Riverside or to Los Angeles
Oh,
if they
yes.
had to be
Oh,
hospitalized?
very much so.
How did they get there, Bess? Were there?
There was train transportation
Oh,
in
of
those
course.
years.
I'd forgotten
10
that.
miles out, we had a station, a train station.
Right.
However, they drove.
We find you here now raising two children,
Yes.
moving certainly into a brand new area, and then the war
Yes.
comes, not only obviously to the world at large, but to this pocket
Yes,
of land.
yes.
Tell us what happened.
Well, when
during the
Irv
war
was
years.
getting a little better and recuperating, he then went to photography school in Los Angeles. I'd always run home to my folks in Los Angeles, and in the summertime. Irv went to school one summer down in Los Angeles.
Two summers.
2 summers. It took 2 summers to do the photography work, and went to school to do that.
And before we get to the war then, tell us, when you came back here after that training, did you open up a photography studio?
Yes. It was wartime then.
It was, so it dovetails
Yes.
with the wartime
Yes.
situation in America.
And I was a little hesitant because I didn't know whether I could afford $50 a month.
That was the rent?
That was the rent for the store.
Where was it?
It was right next door to where Don's.
It was next to Chi-Chi,
No,
right? Well, that
Uncle
was the
Don's
first one.
toy store somewhere
your
around
big,
there?
Yeah, well, your big store.
I started out
Uh-huh.
in a small store next to Don Toy.
Yeah. Uncle Don's toy store corner.
I'm trying to think of it.
I can't think of his last name either. And
Dubose.
is that, I think you're right.
Yes, Don Dubose.
And then would you move to a larger location?
Then I moved across the street next to the Chi-Chi.
Did you have to pay rent all year long?
No, just 8 months out of the year.
Why, what happened to the summer months?
We just, the first summer, I used to build my darkroom in the new store. And
But then they used to put paper on the windows in the summer.
And
And
everybody,
closed up. They didn't work in the summer down here. There was no reason to keep open in those years.
what was the name of the photography studio? Matloff's?
Matloff's Desert Photography.
Did you enjoy that work? Or?
oh, it was tremendous. I got bigger than life
Huh, that's interesting.
in this store. And at Art Center, where I took the course to become a photographer, I learned it so well that I was a natural.
That's marvelous. Bess, tell me, when the war came and Irv was starting his business, what did you decide to do? You had two children.
Well,
What
yes.
school were they going to before we go
Oh,
further?
yes. Vicki and Paul both went to Francis Stevens School. And
Who's the
Catherine Finchie was their principal at that time.
Were you pleased with the education in those
Oh,
years?
yes, it was great fun because they gave the children a lot of individual attention as far as I saw.
Uh-huh.
And I thought that was very good. As far as education on the desert, I didn't think it was in a place where anything would be way up in education. But I was very much surprised. They gave the
nice.
children wonderful education in those years.
What did you do when the war came?
Oh, then when the war came and they built Torney General Hospital, this was the El Mirador Hotel. And that was in 1940, wasn't it, Irv? 1940?
Either 40 or 41.
42. 40 or 42, around there. And I went and joined the ambulance corps.
Can you describe what the property looked like as they built this General Hospital, Tornay General Hospital?
Oh, yes. They increased the land with
Barracks.
buildings, barracks, regular barracks. That's where the patients, they brought in the soldiers into the barracks. And some of the old buildings in the back were converted into hospital rooms.
Bess, what did you personally do as part of that operation?
I drove, at that time, in the motor car, drove an ambulance.
And what did they teach you? I mean, this
No,
is
they
fascinating.
taught you how to handle an ambulance. We had to drive up to Idlewild, and when we could turn in the middle of one of these narrow roads going up to Idlewild in those years, when we could turn our ambulance, the sergeant would say, "Stop, turn," and he'd have both feet on the brakes and both hands on the brakes because the drop was so tremendous, and if he didn't stop, he'd hold back. And then we turned the ambulance around and come down. When you passed that test, you became a driver.
Where did you pick up the patients, Bess? At the
Oh,
railroad
we
station?
would go down, yes.
Uh-huh.
There was a railroad station 10 miles out of Palm Springs North. And yes, that's where we would go to pick up the patients.
Can you tell us
By train.
What particular type of patient problems did you find that you were addressing? Not you personally, but the
Well,
area.
we had a mental section here. We had a lot of the distress and the nerve and the situation that is normal, I guess, for soldiers when they get off the field and have to come for hospitalization.
Was Dr. George Kaplan part of that
Dr.
operation?
George Kaplan was one. He was a
The colonel.
Colonel George Kaplan, yes. And I drove also a transportation car. And I would take we had Dr. Colonel Smeton at that time that I drove for. And I'd have to drive him to Riverside to do the autopsies to the morgue. And I would drive him to Riverside and back here to Palm Springs. And I also did some driving for George Kaplan, he was a colonel also at that time.
And if I'm not mistaken, his time here is what motivated him to
Oh,
return.
exactly. He said that he wanted to come back and live here.
What type of photography did you do during the war here?
Well, I did portraits.
Yeah, but
Of the soldiers.
Of the soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
But I think can you tell us a little bit about the work you did out in the desert, photography? It's not classified anymore, is it?
Well, I had a sergeant major come in to the little studio that I had at the time, and we got to be very friendly. And he approached me. He says, "We got a beer fund, and we've had lots of discussion of what to do with the money." And they decided that they would have a picture or a brochure, an album of some sort with the pictures of each of the battalions in this camp. I can't remember now what the name of the camp was. I think it was Camp Young. And I says, how are we going to get a picture of so many men at one time? And he says, I'll take care of that. He says, you just bring the equipment and we'll shoot it.
Take your time. We've got all the time in the world.
I'd like to describe what this Sergeant Major came up with.
Absolutely.
The tables were long boards, and the seats were nailed to the table. And I don't know whether they ate on those tables or what they did. I imagine that it was a field kitchen, and that's the way they got their food. And they made a base of the tables, and they pyramided the tables. When I got up there, they had a table just for me, for my equipment, and I had a view camera with 4x5 negatives, and they were hard to get during the war. And then I had lamps. Gosh, I forgot the name of the lamps now.
Well, I'm not an expert. I wouldn't know, but are you telling me they pyramided the people very much like we do children now and of a huge graduation?
Correct. And how he managed, with the snap of his voice, and all of a sudden I had a whole battalion
At attention.
at attention.
Well, being the mother of 5, that's impressive to me too.
Yes.
Irv, did you do work for General Patton?
Not for him directly, but General Patton had a sergeant major whose name was Man Mountain Dean. He was a squatty, very muscular, very large in his torso. And they wanted pictures of what was going on with the maneuvers. The pictures that I took were for the 777th Tank Destroyer Battalion. Gosh, it's a wonder I remember that.
I'm impressed. And these were desert shots of their maneuvers out in the desert?
That was a separate job that I did, aside from from those were shots at random. He would point out what he wanted.
I see.
I rode in his Jeep, and I got an album with pictures of Man Mountain Dean.
Did you find that work exciting?
It was very exciting. In fact, the layout and what they were doing, and the officer, as I remember, that was the commanding officer of the 777th Tank Destroyer Battalion, was a small man, meticulously dressed. His clothes were just like he just came out of the store, brand new, and wherever there was leather was highly polished.
Was there a lot of tank activity?
When I took the pictures of the desert,
Yes.
there was lots of activity. They were the forerunners of what happened in Africa, because that's where they were sent.
Right, to fight Rommel.
Rommel.
Fascinating. Tell me, Bess, did you have something to do with Charlie Farrell's wife in those years?
Oh, Virginia Valley was her name, and she let us use her station wagon. The day I was off from my ambulance driving, I would get Virginia Valley's station wagon, and this was for the Red Cross. The Red Cross did this for the boys. We would take them out for the entire day, different groups, and take them out into the desert for recreation. As far as recreation, they could only they stayed in the car. We did take them up to a couple of the date farms and let them get out of the station wagon, and they were very fascinated. They never saw the date. In those years, everything was dates. We
Gee, Bess, don't you think they wanted another kind of date?
Very likely, but this we didn't provide for them. But Virginia Valley was very generous to us at that time, and we were grateful to her for the use of the car.
I think as we're talking, I'm so fascinated by the fact that half circles meet and then all these circles join and become concentric circles. I mean,
Yes.
here's Charlie Farrell and
Yes.
his wife and the Racket Club.
Oh, yes.
Fascinating.
That was all a big part of Palm Springs in the early days. The Racket Club is a story in itself.
Well, if we go from the Racket Club, take us away from there for a moment and tell us what downtown was like, what they did, what you stepped in, etc.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
Yeah. No, it's fun. I mean, that's really so unique to our times
In the
now.
old days, they used to bring in piles of horse manure to spread on the lawns, and that's what they used. This was around August to be ready for September, spreading. And it was so dark here at nighttime all the time. There weren't any street lights. We're going back so many years, things were very rural. And it was so dark, if you took a walk, and I remember the time we took a walk, Victoria and I walked down to the theater. We had the Village Theater then.
Right.
Mr. Streby's theaters, they have since been taken away for the new mall. But we'd walk, and we'd have to walk with flashlights, and if we didn't get that flashlight, we were walking on piles of manure all the way downtown. But downtown itself was a little village, and we enjoyed that very much.
As time went on, Bess, I know that your son Paul,
Yes.
and I frankly I knew even before I had this wonderful opportunity to visit with you, really helped create a milestone in this town.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yes, we started working on the Jewish Community Center, and we just had one room built when Paul was ready for bar mitzvah. Is that what we're talking about?
I think that would be
Yes.
fascinating.
Okay, and he studied, we didn't have a rabbi then. We had a young man that knew his rabbinical services very well and teachings, and he taught Paul. And at that time, Paul was the first one to be bar mitzvah in that one room that was built in those years. We were very proud of that room. It was the only one we had. We used it for sanctuary. We used it for various other things that we did. But when he became bar mitzvah, it was a great thrill to us then.
I can understand
because we never expected, 13 years on the desert, 14 then, we never expected to be able to have a performance like a bar mitzvah for Paul. And all the other kids that came and enjoyed it, that gave them the incentive to continue to be bar mitzvah and learn their Judaism also.
We have here, obviously, a very with it companion to this very talented gentleman.
Yes.
Did you decide on the desert to do anything with your life that would be beyond or coupled with homemaking?
Oh, you mean as far
After
as
the war, I
oh,
mean,
yes.
you must have been exposed to such excitement during the war, in a sense.
Yes. If we were, are we through with the bar mitzvah? I wanted, I didn't want
No.
to, I forgot something.
No problem. Add anything
I
you like.
wanted to, before we went into what I did for myself, we were still with Paul, and there wasn't stores to purchase the proper clothing that he needed for temple. And we had to go into San Bernardino, wasn't it? We had to go into San Bernardino to buy clothes in those years. We didn't have any department stores here. And
Was that a big expedition
Yes.
when one left the desert to go to
Yes,
San
it
Bernardino?
was a whole big deal in those years of going into a town. We didn't have anything here as far as much purchasing power. But we made a big safari out of it and went to San Bernardino and enjoyed it. Bought his clothes and did come back. I only was bringing this out because of the lack of buying power we had in those years.
Oh, I think that's very
But that
important.
goes back a lot of
that
years.
People had the means many times, but no place within our own
yes,
community
exactly.
to utilize
Then
that.
you asked me about what I did for myself.
Yes, uh-huh.
I decided I wanted to do something for myself. I had spent quite a few years on the desert by that time. And I decided that I would go into Los Angeles and be with a cousin of mine, and we took up exercise. And one day I had to wait for her, and in the other room there was teaching real estate. And I went in to see what it was all about accidentally, and I got very fascinated with it. And I listened to the professor doing it, and I said to my cousin, you, after this, you do the exercise, and I will go into class. And I stayed that entire summer with the class in Los Angeles.
Can you give us some time frame?
Yes. Paul was approximately 3 years old, right? That was about 48.
So we're a few years after the war,
Yes.
and still
Oh,
a village,
yes.
still very much a village,
yes.
if I'm
still,
not mistaken.
Still very much a village. And I proceeded to take a examination to become a broker, and I went into real estate. And then Irv took care of the 2 children for me while I stayed in Los Angeles and completed the course.
Well, the more we're chatting, the more I realize you're absolutely the personification of the With It Today couple. Each one is doing their own thing and supportive of the other at different phases of
Ours
life.
was a necessity at that time. We were forced into doing what people today make a big deal out of it and try to do their own thing. You can do it naturally.
As you look back from 1987 to 1934, what are your perceptions of the change? What are your feelings about this time span that has occurred? Do you wish the desert Irv were at a certain arrested point in time that you thought perhaps it was more pleasant, or what have you?
Well, I was very busy in the studio, let's say from 41 to 50. When the soldiers start moving out, that seemed to be the end of my career.
That's when you went to the temple and became their official photographer.
I know, because they still talk about that
Yes.
at the temple today.
Yes. He gave his time then, a lot of it, to the temple and other charity events.
And we see, if I'm not mistaken, how important those photographs become, because they become the living and only record many times
Yes.
of the development of an institution.
At the time you take them, you don't think so much about it. But after 35 years goes by, they become very valuable.
Well, in looking back with you, Bess, is there a time that you would rather have stopped at, or do you appreciate the desert for each phase that it's gone
Oh
through?
yes, each phase was very impressive, and it was very enjoyable. And the desert's been very good to us. It was very good. Irv mentioned how good it was to him. He got well here. We both got back into doing our own thing. Every time while I was in real estate, we bought land. Other people go to the bank for money. We sell another piece of land. And then
That's a very wise move.
yes, we did things that had to be done for our situation. And it wasn't easy all the time. And you do have,
There were lots of tears in between.
yes.
Well, I know that you both really personify the pioneer spirit of what desert
Of-
living
of
was
what you had
and
to do.
is in other ways all about today. Is there anything that you would like to add at any span of time informally?
Is there anything you remember that we left out? There was one teacher Vicki had still here. Moya Henderson was her physical
yeah,
education
she just
teacher.
recently retired from the school district, but still keeps her hand in many ways to help us out.
And there's still many other teachers that I see in town, old timers.
Well, I think the community is lucky, fortunate beyond measure, that it was developed by people of your caliber, and I've been honored to meet with you and learn to know you better.
What
It's
a nice
pleasure.
thing to
I
say.
absolutely, sincerely mean that.
Can I mention about that after I did all of these things, I decided that with the lack of hospitals we had here, I decided one nice thing to do was do something because of the experience that we have had, that how you can become devastated during illness if you have no place to go. And therefore, we started a City of Hope chapter in Palm Springs.
That's I'm glad you
yes,
mentioned that.
Yes, and that's 30 years ago. We just celebrated 30 years. And of course, I did that because there was an awful lot of respiratory problems here in the desert. And they had no place to go. And City of Hope took them in. If City of Hope can help, if it is in their category to take care of these illnesses, which they do, they take patients in with no charge. So therefore, I felt that that was a wonderful institution to join up with because it was free and unsectarian.
You know, you brought that up. I forgot to ask you the other day when we were chatting. Did you see the growth, the formation, and therefore the growth of Desert Hospital?
Oh, yes.
And was it once, can you tell us a little bit about what it appeared to you to be as it was growing?
Oh, yes. It was a great joy to see the great growth of the Desert Hospital. After the war, it went back to the El Mirador Hotel, and then it became the Desert purchased for the Desert Hospital. And it started small, and it grew over the years to a very successful operation. Oh, I think they've done wonderful with the Desert Hospital here. They have had their ups and their downs, and right now I think
Haven't we all?
But I think they're on their ups.
Oh, that's nice.
And it's wonderful to know that the local people have a place to go. That was a great joy with the desert community. I think one of the biggest things was that when the hospital became the Desert Hospital here, it was the only one in the entire desert area where people had a place to go right at home.
Right.
And didn't have to go out anymore. So that was one of the great accomplishments.
Irv, do you have any extra thoughts that you would like to share with us before we part from this tape?
I go back to my brochure that I made for the Tank Destroyer Battalion, of the awareness of this Sergeant Major. I got to get this right.
Take your time.
He noticed that something went awry with my camera because my flashlight didn't go off. And most of the troops were already off the benches. And he says, "You need a new flashlight." And in a command with his rough voice, he got the soldiers back up on perch there, and I shot another shot, which would have been going forever if he he didn't have the command of the soldiers getting on and off that perch. But how aware he was, watching me and my camera, to have noticed that I didn't shoot the film.
Have you used that moment in your life to realize how aware we all have to be that what we miss if we're not?
Well, I gained a lot of awareness because I sat on my backside and watched the world go by for almost 8 years before I got back into the mainstream of support my family again, which was very important to me.
I can understand that. And I think we're lucky again, fortunate, that you got back into the mainstream here in this desert community. I want to thank again very good friends, Irv and Bess Matloff, and I'm so glad that your comments will be for